Good afternoon. Can I welcome you all at this special occasion, CEPS Ideas Lab, Europe's choice. 2 days to discuss all aspects of European policy, and can I invite our chairman to take the floor, because we have a tight schedule now with the lead candidate in a moment, but before that, let's say we'll have the Romanian governor of the Romanian Central Bank. So I'm very pleased to introduce our chairman, Joaquin Almunia, who will introduce the two other speakers and who will also set the scene for today's debate. Thank you.
Good afternoon to everybody. Thank you very much for coming to a new edition of Ideas Lab, the 2019 edition. We will have our discussions today and tomorrow, as in the previous occasions, with a lot of speakers, with a lot of debates, with a lot of areas of discussion. But this year is a special year because we are in a European electoral year. We are a few months before the European elections, and we are very happy to have here with us, apart all of you, apart all the speakers, the first Vice President of the Commission and candidate for the presidency of the next Commission, Frans Timmermans, that in a few minutes will address to you his ideas and will have a dialogue with you. I want to thank you, the sponsors. You have the list of sponsors in the program that has been distributed to all the participants. Thank you very much for the support, without which CEPS will not be able to organize year after year this fantastic conference and to bring to you all the ideas that we have been investigating, we have been writing, we have been publishing and distributing during the last months. You also have a report elaborated by the staff of CEPS, but all those who are in the research activities. We have been able to put in a book our ideas about how the present Commission has delivered from their original priorities, how these priorities has been implemented or not due to the Commission intentions, but in most of the occasions because of the complex discussions in the Council and the European Parliament. But we also have introduced in this report our ideas regarding the future, what we consider as steps, what the participants in this book, all of them members of the steps report, the priorities that in our mind should be integrated in the platform, in the program of the next Commission and of the next European institution cycle after the election of the new leaders of the different EU institutions. I want to thank, of course, all the CEPS staff for the fantastic organization of this event. The elections in this year, in May 2019, are particularly relevant because the complexity of the political situation in many of our member states and because of the doubts regarding the composition of the next parliament, given that probably the political spectrum will be more fragmented than ever, and that part of those who will want seats in the European Parliament from May 2019 onwards will not have the same positive idea regarding the European integration that has been the traditional mainstream majority of the European Parliament since the direct elections in 1979. CEPS have worked hard during the last 12 months to try to offer ideas, to deepen our knowledge of the different alternatives in different areas, in different policies. We are the think tank that has a broader program of activities, of research in the different areas where the European Union and the European institutions are relevant, are responsible. We are very proud of this. We are very proud of the quality and independence of our research. We cannot imagine the CEPS activity without the protection, the maximum protection of our independence. We produce ideas that we think are the right ones without any kind of external influence beyond our conviction that democracy, freedoms, and the European integration are values that should be shared by everybody, if possible, in our continent. We want to use these couple of days to deepen our exchange of views, to collect your contributions, your ideas, and to interact with all of you, representatives of private sector or public sector, of national or European institutions. And in our report, we want to help those who will be responsible for the next 5 years of the European integration with independent ideas, forward-looking ideas, not defensive ideas, but all the elements that we need to integrate, according to our view, in the policies, in the strategies that will be implemented by the next responsibles of the European Union in the coming times. I conclude here my short presentation, and I want now to give the floor before Frans Timmermans to the governor of the Romanian Central Bank that is with us, and I want to thank him and his institution for the support that they gave to the organization and to the development of this edition of Ideas Lab. Romania is right now occupying the presidency of the European Union, of the Council of the European Union, and the governor for sure will give us the flavor of the feelings of Romania from his perspective, an independent perspective as governor of the Central Bank, but I am sure that will help all of us to better understand what are the objectives, the priorities, and the intentions of this country for the development of our common project in Europe. Thank you very much to all of you, and Governor, you have the floor now.
Chairman Almunia, thank you very much for introducing me. First, Vice President Timmermans, ladies and gentlemen. It is a great privilege for me to attend the annual meetings of the Center for European Policy Studies at a momentous time for the Union. Surely the elections of the European Parliament are on my mind as well, but not exclusively. As the topic of this year's meeting amply suggests, we, as European citizens, need to make the right choices so that the future of the Union continues the project that has always fostered peace and economic reconstruction after the Second World War. It is the same project that has helped Central Eastern European countries return to Europe after the fall of the Berlin Wall. This Center for European Policy Studies is a great scene for discussing the huge challenges our Union is facing at the moment. It brings together high officials from EU institutions and national governments, academics, and representatives of the civil society and business circles. I speak not only on behalf of the Central Bank of Romania, but also as a representative of a country that holds the rotating presidency of the EU Council. I trust that we will be able to fulfill our mandate and advance projects of substance for the Union. Let me focus in the minutes I have at my disposal on several economic issues. Our debate is more important for it takes place at a time of some economic slowdown all over Europe and of an erosion of multilateralism and spreading trade conflicts. The prospect of a hard Brexit is very annoying for all of us, and I still very much hope that such a denouement would be avoided. Likewise, it is high time to strike a deal on the multi-annual financial framework so as the great challenges the Union is facing, protection of borders, cyberfare, climate change, conflicts in near and more remote neighborhoods and others, find proper conciliation with the need to preserve the cohesion of the Union and avoid further fragmentation. I also trust that the EU leaders will find the right balance to address key institutional and policy-related weaknesses of the euro area. I mention this for Romania, like other non-euro member states, is bound by EU accession treaties to join the single currency area eventually. And hopefully this will happen in the not too distant future. In this regard, I wish to mention that two major documents of Romania's path to the euro area, an analytical report and a plan of action, have been recently completed and have been subjected to the scrutiny and approval of the political parties and the Romanian Parliament. I should say that we are not oblivious to what it takes for accession to be a success. No matter how much one wishes to put accession on the fast lane, success hinges on having achieved a critical mass of real and structural convergence with the euro area. The lessons of the euro area crisis remind us starkly this reality. The more robust the euro area turns as a result of the institutional and policy reforms, the better for all of us. When it comes to the reforms of the euro area, I would highlight the respect for rules and their enforcement on one hand, and the introduction of risk-sharing schemes on the other. Among the latter, I range a collective deposit insurance scheme, which, together with a much stronger resolution fund, would complete the banking union, and the introduction of instruments that can help member states deal with asymmetric shocks. Let me make also a few remarks on the macroeconomic scene in Europe. The economic recovery of recent years has been heavily dependent on non-standard operation of the main central banks and very low interest rates. There are still large public and private debts, which are especially burdensome in the several euro area countries, and which complicate the mission of policy normalization of unwinding special operation of European Central Bank. Fortunately, some countries in our region, including Romania, enjoy a much better situation with respect of public debt. The very low inflation is prompting some to argue that policy normalization may have to wait still, but perverse effects need not to be underplayed. It is likely that policy normalization, understood at least by me as a return to positive real policy rates, will be quite a time-consuming process, particularly in Europe. When it comes to monetary policy, let me mention only a few challenges. The model central banks use have baffled in quite a few instances. We still do not have a clear answers as to why inflation is persistently so low in most of the Union, in spite of economic recovery. Financial stability concerns are increasingly on our radars. There are other puzzles, like the flattening of the Phillips curve, and I will range here the fall of financial intermediation in some non-euro member states, in Romania and Hungary in particular. This seems to be a clear case of creditless recovery, but that may also be the outcome of financial integration, for international companies prefer to source credit on external markets, where this may be cheaper. Underdevelopment creates additional challenges for monetary policy since catching up is close to a high inflation, the Balázs-Samuelson effect. This may not be a problem right now in view of the overall context, but it will be likely to turn out to bother us in not too distant future. Migration of human capital, which is very intense in some countries, including Romania, also puts a pressure on wages and fuels inflation. Now, some final words I would direct towards the threat of protectionism. An enormous risk for the global economy is the temptation to shed the commitment for multilateralism and embark on protectionism. Beggar-thy neighbor policies are quite dangerous, as history shows. It is true that trade needs to be both free and fair, The commitments made within the framework of the World Trade Organization and other fora need to be observed. Unless we defend open markets, we invite big commercial conflicts and proliferation of lose-lose situations. And now allow me to conclude by my short address, by pointing out that as a Romanian official, I'm confident the important steps have been already taken to ensure more close cooperation in order to solve the aforementioned issues. As you know, Romania holds at the moment the presidency of the Council of European Union, and good work has already been done by our teams in Bucharest and Brussels. They held 15 working parties in the Council, negotiated in 18 trialogues with the European Parliament, attending over 30 technical meetings, among bilateral meetings, informal consultations with the Parliament and the Commission. They have concluded the work and agreed on 2 files. One is risk reduction measures, the banking package, and the other pan-European pension product. There has been a political agreement with the European Parliament and 2 other files, cross-border distribution funds and European market infrastructure regulation refit. And I understand they have reached a general approach on the European system of financial supervision file at the Council level. I'm sure we'll keep up the good work, and efforts on every side will have a positive outcome. The future might be uncertain, but we can surely try to better prepare for it. Thank you for your attention.
Gentlemen.
Thank you very much, Governor. Now, I will give the floor to the first Vice President of the European Commission and candidate for the next elections, Frans Timmermans.
Thank you very much, Joachim. Thank you. Good afternoon. Challenging times for all of us. But it wouldn't be fun if they weren't challenging. So let's try and find some answers. It's quite daunting to discover that for the first time since the Second World War, there is a president of the United States who believes that it's in American interest to have a weak and divided Europe, because then he thinks he can have a better transactional relationship with the individual member states. It's quite a challenge. It's even a bigger challenge if you then see that his idea of relationships is entirely transactional. That's quite a challenge, because our idea of relationships is that they should also be based on values that we share and on a international system based on multilateralism. The challenge is bigger because this is just one aspect of a world that is changing at breakneck speed. We're in the middle of the beginning of the 4th Industrial Revolution, which will leave no stone unturned. There is not going to be any part of our society or economy that is not going to be affected by this. And I mean this at a global scale. Nobody will escape from that. And if that is the case, like in any other industrial revolution, it also means that all institutions will be challenged, will be looked at again, will have to prove their usefulness, and will have to prove their adaptability to the new challenges. And if I look across European societies today, I think this challenge is being put by our citizens, yes, to the European institutions, but not just there, also to national institutions. Are you still delivering what you need to deliver? Is the social contract that is the basis of our society still functioning for us, for the common good? These are fundamental questions, and we cannot answer these fundamental questions without being self-critical and without understanding that this scrutiny will affect all of us and that we better have a good response to that. Now, what I see across Europe and societies is that there are two sorts of responses. One is to say, this doesn't deliver for us anymore, this European Union, European construction. Let's go back to a national construction. Let's just use the defences we have at a national scale to try and find solutions for our citizens. And then this is very often combined with different forms of nationalism. And nationalism has as an essential element that you need enemies. You can't be a nationalist if you don't have enemies. And the enemies are within and the enemies are without. Because even the nationalists understand that nationalism will not bring solutions, to then keep people on your side, you have two instruments. Keep them afraid and say that you're the only one that can protect them. And secondly, give them somebody to blame. So if you can't give them solutions, you give them scapegoats. And this is appealing to the darkest angels of European history and to the darkest angels of human nature. And it's easy. And for a time it works until the disappointments are huge. I want to mention specifically, before I go to the other side of the coin, I want to mention specifically that I'm extremely worried about the rise of anti-Semitism across the European Union. Both the old anti-Semitism in different forms and the new anti-Semitism that hides behind anti-Zionism. It's always, the Jewish population of Europe is always a canary in the coal mine when things tend to become tense and go wrong in our societies. And we should really be aware of this, and we should join all the people in France and elsewhere who go out into the streets and make clear that anti-Semitism in Europe has no place. Now, the other response to these global challenges is, and this is a response we see in analyses that is shared by a substantial majority of the European population, the other response is we need to act collectively as Europeans. So the good news is there is support for this position in a majority of the European population. That support is not always straightforward. For instance, you could have in countries like Denmark and Sweden, the support for the EU is higher than ever before, above 70%. But then if you ask these people, do we need more EU policies, then it's no. We need to work together, but no more EU policies. So there are sometimes some contradictions in that, but we can work with that. I take comfort from the fact that a majority of the European population understand that we're in this together. This was also helped by the position of the American president and also helped by the Brexit debate. Because we discovered through the Brexit debate that being Eurosceptical and attacking the EU comes at a price. We thought for many, many years you could do that because the EU was indestructible, so you could attack it and sort of play games with it. It could get you votes, but it would survive anyway. And now we see that if you just keep attacking the EU, it has an effect on public opinion, and I think the proof was given in the United Kingdom, where if you 20 years of only bashing the EU, and then at the end of that period you ask people to support the EU, you might not get the answer you were looking for. So I think it is also a good thing that we understand it's not indestructible. You know, something that is not indestructible is also not very valuable. Something that is frailer and destructible is something you want to protect and cherish and improve. And that is our European Union. But, so you have a majority of people that are saying, we believe in working together as European Union. Sometimes they say, because it is necessary, you know, like going to the dentist is necessary, not something you like to do, but hey, it's unavoidable. Or because we want to. And my goal is, in the years to come, that we can convince more and more people that we make the choice for Europe because we want to. Not because we have to, but because we want to. And I also say this because those who say we have to, they run the risk of creating an apolitical Europe. If you have to do something, if there's no other choice, then of course you take politics out of it, whereas the European Union is a political project. So you want us to commit to it because it's good for us and because we want it. And I think there are several areas where I believe, I'm touring around Europe a lot now, where I believe I get some ideas where people would like us to renew the social contract. Of course, there are many differences between member states, but a few things really come out of all of this. Although it is one of the most difficult subjects to tackle, and although people very often don't like to face that reality, but people everywhere understand that the issue of migration can only be addressed with European solutions, and that just going for fences and walls will not solve the problem. So I think we need to, but that's from different parts of Europe, from different geographical positions, from different political positions, you bring different elements to the debate, which isn't bad, as long as you understand that at the end of the day you will have to find compromises that will be carried by everyone. And I believe if there is one area where Europe's foreign policy should have to concentrate in the years to come, in the mandate of the new Parliament, new Commission, I would say it would be to create a sustained, long-term relationship of equality with our sister continent, Africa. I honestly believe that the United States does not have that much interest in Africa. The interest in Africa from China is relatively one-sided, I would argue. And Africans are increasingly coming to understand that. So the offer Europe should make, not saying it can make or wants to make it, but the offer I think Europe should make is one of real partnership. Not that Africa should become members of the European Union, that's not what I'm saying, but I'm saying it is of the same magnitude as crossing the Rhine in 1945, as crossing the Elbe in 1989, and I would say now crossing the Mediterranean in this new millennium in an effort to create a community of values and of shared interests. Because we tend to see the demographic growth of Africa as a challenge or a threat. But just imagine what this demographic growth could mean if it is embedded in societies that use economic opportunity, that just jump over some of the developments we had to make in the Fourth Industrial Revolution, that do make the choices for a sustainable economy, that do provide better education, that do fight corruption, that do bring the rule of law, then Africa would be a powerhouse in the future in many areas. And that is in essential European interest. And I think it would be good if we could seriously invest in that. And I see young voices in Africa increasingly embracing that idea. So that would be one first element I would look at. Secondly, because I started specifically with foreign policy because we should avoid the situation of Europe just only looking inwardly, just looking at itself, because there is an interaction between this. Secondly, China, obviously, we shouldn't be naive about China, but we also shouldn't share the obsessiveness of some of the American right on China. I think there is room for a very important, structured, strong relationship with China, but then also Europe will have to face the fact that we will have to have an industrial policy that is coherent. The Chinese have an industrial policy that's coherent. Our industrial policy should not only be about competition rules and state aid rules, it should also be about fundamental choices we make about the structure of the European industry in the fourth and beyond the fourth industrial revolution. It's very, very important. I think this should be one of the most important debates we need to have before launching the new European Commission. Then I believe that part of the social contract, part of the unease of our people is in the fact that society is perceived as unjust. So how do you create more justice? First of all, I think we urgently need to complete the banking union. It is urgent. We need to make sure that if there is another crisis, that banks do not have to be bailed out by taxpayers with the argument that otherwise failing banks would draw down the economy. I think we tend to underestimate the trauma that was created in many of our countries by the fact that so many billions of euros of taxpayers' money had to be used to bail out failing banks. they should be able to take care of themselves in the future. And that's why I believe the banking union is of essential importance. Secondly, I also believe we need to build on the first beginnings of the social pillar in Europe. I believe every EU member state should have a minimum wage. It's not the same minimum wage, but the minimum wage is a guarantee to stop the reality of many European young people working for 3 or 4 euros an hour. That is completely unacceptable and socially very, very undermining and completely unnecessary from an economic point of view. And if you make sure that there is a minimum wage in every member state of the European Union, you can build on that also in coordinating social policies. You know, now that because of the integration of the member states that joined in 2004 into the wider European economy, now that the discrepancies, the disparities in economic development and in level of living and cost of living are disappearing, it's about time we also took care of the huge difference in wages between the two areas. I think there's no justification anymore if the cost of living is the same in country X and Y, that the salaries in country X should be so much higher or so much lower than in country Y. This is also an element of injustice I think we all need to address, and to address it urgently. This transformation into the new economy goes hand in hand with the need to make our economy, our society, our systems sustainable. The best guidelines we have for that are the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, the 17 SDGs. I would make that a pivotal element in the work of the new Commission. If I'm Commission President, I would be personally responsible for the implementation of the SDGs and making sure that Europe prepares well in an integrated way for 2030 and beyond. And we can only do that if we transform our economy into a circular economy, if we take care of the waste problem, if we make sure that we seriously implement the Paris agreements, if we look at our educational system, because there's going to be so many jobs in the future, but jobs that require skills, and too much of our labour force is not prepared for those skills. So we need to change educational systems to make sure that they are prepared for those skills. And I think in our effort to become more sustainable, I would like to see a huge programme focused on housing. Wherever I go, the complaint is, especially of young people, we cannot find affordable housing. And if you know that we need to transform our housing into sustainable housing, why not combine that? Build more, build sustainable, rebuild, transform. It's a huge investment, but it pays off. It pays off. So I'm just giving you a couple of ideas before I speak too long of things the next Commission, in my view, should be proposing. Now, I think we should also, two more things. One, we should not only discuss this in the framework of who's competent. We should not only be talking about things, well, it's not in the treaty, so the Commission should not be talking about it. If it is a societal problem and a challenge, the Commission should be talking about it. And the least we can do is then point to the responsibility of others, member states, and help them come to terms with that. And I do believe that we need more policy-oriented decision-making in the European Union, not just oriented towards new legislation, but policy orientation. And in that sense, I think there are, we have a political triumvirate in Europe. The Commission is political, but the Commission cannot be political if the European Parliament isn't also seen as political, and if the Council isn't seen as political. We don't do this in isolation. It's a production of three, or there is no production at all. And we at the Commission are very much aware of the strength of the European Parliament. I would hope that the Council would step by step understand that strength as well, so that we can work together to make things happen. By the way, kudos to the Romanian presidency. They are finishing one after the other trilogue. They're doing an incredible job to actually get as much legislation done before the next election. And my second remark would be this: yes, the outcome of the European elections will be a reflection of what's happening everywhere. The time of eternal, big, centre-left, centre-right parties has come and gone. The political landscape all over Europe has changed. So you will need broader coalitions than before. It's happening in most of our member states. It will also be happening at the European level. And I think that you need to understand that after the election, Every party in the European Parliament should understand that no party is inevitable. A bit more modesty in some parties would help. No party is inevitable. And the second thing we should understand, every party who has a stake in improving the European construction has a responsibility to work towards finding compromises. I think if we can have that as a starting point, have more transparency in how we decide, have more openness in how the Commission works, more broader political representation at all levels, I think we can bring Europe forward. It's a daunting challenge. I believe in it. I think we could do great things in the coming years. I hope I can count on your support. Thank you very much.
Yes. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Franz Timmermans, for the speech and for being here today with us. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, also from my side. My name is Sophia Russak, and I will chair the remainder of this session. Now, we would like to, in this session, we would like to address your most burning questions, and therefore we will work with Slido. Some of you might remember this from last year. Slido allows you to submit your questions online, and also to vote on questions of other participants. And that's a quite nice indicator for me to see what interests you most. So please make use of that tool. It's very easy to join. It should be in the background now. Yes, you see it on the very right. You just have to take out your mobile devices, open your web browser, go to slido.com and enter hashtag CEPSLab19. And then you can enter questions and upvote other questions. And if you prefer to raise a question in person, that's of course also possible, then please give me a hand signal and somebody will assist you with a microphone. I will give you a moment to think about questions, and in the meantime I would like to turn to Joachim. Would you like to directly react to what we just heard?
Well, thank you very much for your contribution, for the inauguration of this Ideas Lab, for your vision of the real challenges and how to tackle those challenges. Well, behind all the obstacles that we found in the recent years to adopt decisions that, from the European point of view, looks as necessary, are two elements. Maybe one is nationalism, certain nostalgia of the nation-state's sovereignty, full sovereignty, and second, the emergence of powers that seems to be more relevant in the world, in the global world. How do you see the possibilities in the coming years to learn the lessons of these failures or of this lack of efficiency of the European Union as a decision maker, both inside the EU and vis-à-vis the other partners in the world?
I think sooner or later, the recipe of nationalism will run out of force. The question is how soon, and the question is what can we do to speed up the process? Because I believe there is a large majority of Europeans who understand that you need reasonable compromise policies to bring things forward, I believe the best recipe to counter nationalism is to come with policies in policy areas that are urgently needed, and to be very concrete and try and get decisions made. Now, for that, of course, you need at least a qualified majority of the Council and Parliament. I understand that, but I do believe there is opportunity to get there. You know, by attacking the nationalists just by saying they're bad doesn't help at all. It's like, you know, when you run a restaurant and you say you should come and eat here because the one across the road has bad food, that will not work. So you have to have your own ideas. You have to be more vocal about these ideas. And I think we should, you know, and I say this with a lot of self-criticism as a social democrat. For many years, when people said, we're worried, we're insecure, we don't know what's happening, we had a tendency of giving them a PowerPoint presentation explaining with numbers why they're wrong. That doesn't work at all. So you need to start from where people's hopes and anxieties are and provide solutions for the anxieties and give impetus to the hope. And I think this is in the social area. It is linked to healthcare. It is linked to housing. It is also linked to jobs. It is linked to taking away the fear that automation, robotization will destroy jobs and showing that it can create jobs. I mean, these are the things you need to bring to the table. And we need to do this with great urgency. And we need to do this in a coordinated way between all levels. And not sort of, you know, tendency in Brussels to say, oh, we fail because member states fail, or member states saying we fail because the European Union fails. We're in this together. We're in this together. A blame game will not convince anyone. So we need to take collective responsibility for finding concrete solutions for issues. I think we've shown the capability to do that. I think there is more support for Europe now than there was a couple of years ago. Let's try and use that to even increase the performance of Europe.
Let me ask you a question about the fields of one of your key responsibilities, the rule of law. Many think, and I think this is also one of the key outputs of our report that Joachim mentioned, is that the rule of law will be one of the key priorities for the next European Commission. So Slido, one of our participants, entered the following question: what can the next European Commission do to prevent the Copenhagen dilemma, that is, to introduce a regular rule of law mechanism?
I believe it is essential for the future of the European Union that we assume collective responsibility for the rule of law. Not just the Commission. Yes, we will use the instruments we have, infringement procedures, Article 7 and other instruments. But the time has come and gone that member states can say, well, I'd rather not criticize a colleague, let the Commission do it. We tried that, it doesn't work. So member states will also have to assume the collective responsibility for the rule of law. And the rule of law, if there is a problem with the rule of law, in my experience, there is usually also a problem more generally with democracy. Because in those countries where we have serious problems with the rule of law, mostly the definition of democracy has become, I win the election, so I call the shots. I win the election, so I get to choose the judges. I win the election, so I get to control the media. I win the election, so I get to say to the private sector what they should do. I win the election, and I get to say to NGOs, shut up. You know, if that is the definition of democracy, we destroy the European Union. A democratic vote can only be valuable in a democracy if those who are elected respect the rule of law. If they say, we're the majority, but we do respect the rules of the games, and we are subject to those rules just as the minority is. And I believe this is an essential element, not just for democracy reasons, but perhaps you will let me make this point, also for the functioning of the internal market. I'll be very specific. For the functioning of the internal market, it is essential that EU regulations are implemented in exactly the same way all across the European Union. If there are doubts about that, national judges will interpret the interpretation of EU legislation. They do that, and then they become European judges, in fact, in the national sphere. If those judges are unsure about how to do this, they can ask a question directly to the European Court of Justice that will help them interpret the EU legislation the correct way. If in any way or form a government or another authority can intervene in that, can tell the judges what they need to think, can tell the judges how the law should be implemented, that leads to the breakdown of the internal market, because then you would not have uniform application of EU law. So apart from the fundamental democratic point, there is also a practical point in terms of the internal market if we're not very careful in guaranteeing the independence of the judiciary and guaranteeing the rule of law.
Thank you very much. Can I have one question from the floor, maybe? Anybody who would like to? Yes, there's a gentleman. Perfect. Can you introduce yourself? Is it not work?
Does it work?
Yes.
My name is Paul Schmidt from the Austrian Society for European Politics. My telephone ran out of battery, so I used the classical way to ask the question. Mr. Timmermans, thank you for your speech and your inspiring words. Two small questions for you. We are some 5 weeks away from Brexit, from a possible Brexit. What, in your view, could the EU still do to avoid a hard Brexit? And the second question would be what you think the impact of a Brexit could be on the European elections on the 26th of May. Thank you.
Well, I think we are open for business. If the British government has plans or ideas to improve the withdrawal agreement or the political declaration, we will obviously be ready to listen to that and work with the British government. But I have to also to be crystal clear, we cannot put into jeopardy the integrity of the internal market. Just imagine you would have Brexit without the United Kingdom being part of a customs union or an internal market, and then you would have no border in Ireland. That would mean that products from anywhere in the world, chlorinated chicken or anything else, could then be brought across the border without anybody controlling it. And once it is across the border in Ireland, it's everywhere. It's in Estonia, it's in the Netherlands, it's in Romania, it's everywhere. That's how the internal market works. And we cannot jeopardize the integrity of the internal market. We have to be sure that products that come into our internal market comply with EU rules. It is essential for the health of our people, it's essential for political reasons, it's essential for economic reasons. So they should stop having a pipe dream in the UK that you can not have rules on this and not have a border in Ireland. Now, coming to the issue of the border, I think we have a historic collective responsibility as Europeans to understand that the Good Friday Agreement is part of our most important political legacies. This is how we put an end to terrorism on the island of Ireland and strife. And reintroducing a hard border in Ireland, you would run the enormous risk of those ghosts from the past coming back. And I would appeal to the hardliners in Westminster to understand what they're putting into jeopardy if they continue with this line. So, of course the European Union wants to be helpful, but there are limits. There are limits. We cannot jeopardize the internal market. We certainly will not throw Ireland under the bus. Absolutely not. This is really a case of all for one, one for all. And we certainly don't want to reintroduce a hard border in Ireland. So, and if these are the things that the British government want to, then I think the withdrawal agreement is still the best possible option. And I hope they will come to understand that very soon.
And how about the impact of...
Will it have an impact on... Well, it has had an impact. If I look at my own country, the Netherlands, we had a rather substantial parts of the political spectrum and parts of the population developed this idea that Nexit might be a good idea. But the last couple of years, watching the UK has been an incredibly effective antidote against that. So in that sense, it already has affected the European elections. The European elections are not going to be about in or out of the EU, which I think is a sterile debate. They're going to be about policies, I think. They're going to be about policy choices, about sustainability, about social fairness, about the future of the economic and monetary union, about our position vis-à-vis Russia, about our position vis-à-vis China, and about the internal situation. I mean, everywhere I go, people talk to me about values, 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 values. You shouldn't think this is just an elitist thing. People watch this, people feel strongly about this, and we should have a response to that as well.
We stay for a moment with Brexit. How are we going to maintain a close relationship with the UK in the future?
Again, I believe that's a historic duty. I think all of us are under an obligation to do everything we can to make this divorce the least acrimonious as possible, because I think it would be tragic for the UK, but also for Europe, if the years to come would be marked by sort of a nasty competition between the UK and the European Union, who has the best economic model, who has the best trade deals, whatever. You know, if you look at, together with the UK, we're only 7% of the world's population, only 7%. So there is no, it's only self-defeating if we make this relationship acrimonious. And I would say in all the areas where intensive cooperation is possible, we should invest in it. We should invest in it. But of course there are limits, as I said before. We cannot sacrifice the integrity of the internal market. We cannot sacrifice the integrity of the rules-based cooperation at in the European Union. But beyond that, I think there's a lot we can do together with the United Kingdom. There's no joy in seeing British people suffer in Brexit. It breaks my heart. Brexit is one of the saddest things I've ever experienced in my life. And I, you know, it's whatever they're saying, the radicals there, however often they insult us, and it happened to me again this week, whatever they're saying, you know, I just try not to react to that emotionally, because the deepest emotion I have is one of deep sadness that this is happening to a continent that needs unity today more than ever before in its history.
Thank you. Let's leave Brexit and move on to environment. What would you say to students protesting every week in the streets of Brussels to ask politicians to save them from the climate crisis?
I'd shout out to them and say, go on, do this. My kids do it too. I'm proud of them.
So what do you say to your kids?
What I say to them is, and this is what I've been saying for years, and in the beginning they got angry with me, and now I have them more and more on my side, and that makes me very proud. They have the future. This is a generation that is no longer fired on by ideology in any way or form, but they are full of idealism. I see it every day, this idealism, but this idealism focuses on concrete subjects, such as climate change, concrete subjects, such as plastics. I mean, when we presented our plastics proposal, which is, I think, the most revolutionary proposal on plastics in the world, the overwhelming support of the young generation was heartwarming. So we have concrete subjects where you can mobilize young people. But what I've been saying to my students and others now for years, I love your idealism, but it will not be effective if you don't get organized. You know, this is this generation talking. If you want a system to change, you have to become masters of the system. It will not suffice to put a nice comment on Facebook to change the world. You will have to get organized. And what I'm seeing now is that the young generation, step by step, is getting organized. And my message to them is, political parties are up for grabs. If you're young, if you're motivated, if you can get organized, you can take over these political parties and mold them in your form. That is what should be done. Or you create a new political party and brush aside the others. But you need the system, to change. Then you need to be in the system, or you need to be parallel to the system. But without a system, there will be no change. The first time I went with my son, who at the time I think was about 22 or 23. I went to a rock concert. I was a minister at the time, and we were listening to a band we like a lot, both of us, called Rage Against the Machine. I don't know if you know that, yeah. And then my son, I said, well, isn't this great, isn't this great? And then my son looked at me and he said, don't you know that you're the machine? So that's what I'm saying. We're the machine, but we should invite them to come into the machine and make a better machine. That's my point to the young generation.
Thank you. Thanks. So anybody else's battery is down and want to ask a question? Yes, please. I have a lady in, yes, exactly. Sylvie to the left? Yes. Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Vice President. Susan Danger, I'm the CEO of the American Chamber of Commerce to the EU. Just so everyone knows, we stand completely behind a strong and united Europe primarily, but also a strong transatlantic relationship. So my question to you would be, bearing in mind you kicked off your excellent presentation referring to the views of the current US president, How do you see that we can change those perceptions? What would you do if you were to become the president of the European Commission? What would you do to change that? We could indeed well have the US president in place for another 6 years, so we can't just sit there and do nothing. So comments on your focus on the transatlantic relationship, which you haven't mentioned. You mentioned Africa. And what are you going to do to make things different? Thank you very much.
Well, let me be very, very clear, especially because of the political movement I'm part of. I am a staunch transatlanticist, and I've been a staunch transatlanticist from the very first day I went into politics. But I also believe that the transatlantic relationship can only be stronger, better, survive even, if Europe takes a greater responsibility for its own security. There is no contradiction between being stronger in defense as Europeans and being part of the transatlantic relation. I think it's complementary. If we do not take a stronger responsibility for that, both in financial terms but also in practical terms, in getting better organized, then the Americans will increasingly be fed up with us, will be frustrated, and that will not depend on the incumbent who is in the White House. I think this is a longer-term issue, and even had Hillary Clinton, had the popular vote prevailed and Hillary Clinton was president, we would be having the same discussion. We would not be having the same confrontation, but we would be having the same discussion. This was a long time coming. So I think we need to realize we need to do that. Now, much of this, and I think, secondly, it is now extremely urgent that the European nations in NATO stick together and convince our American friends that it's in no one's interest to have a new nuclear arms race. It is looming out there, and we should do everything possible to prevent this from getting out of hand. And it's very close from getting out of hand, and the victim here will be Europe if we're not very careful. So I think we need to use all the power of conviction we have in NATO to make sure that we turn away from an escalation and that we find a solution on the INF with the Russians and I think with the Chinese, because it's become a broader problem than just a bilateral problem between the United States and Russia. Now, furthermore, I said something about NATO. That's not going to be my responsibility in the Commission. What can the Commission do? I talked about industrial policy earlier. I think we need urgently a coherent industrial policy at the European level. One element of that will have to be a defense industrial policy. Too much taxpayers' money is completely wasted because there is no coherence in our defense industrial policy. That the Commission can bring to the table to strengthen also our transatlantic link, to be stronger, working together so that less taxpayers' money gets wasted and that we help European. I'm not one of those who's saying there's going to be a European army anytime soon. I'm saying we can have more coherence in European defense contributions. We can have specialization, we can have integration. You see armed forces across borders integrating their effects. We should be investing a lot in that. And then I believe that trade will be one of the most important instruments. The trade negotiations, trade talks, to prevent things from getting completely out of hand in the next couple of years. And we need to do some damage limitation right now. We need to show that the European Union is capable of having very good trade agreements with other parts of the world to also stimulate a positive dialogue with the Americans on trade. And it is very much, sadly, very much driven by ideology and not just interest. And I hope we can take that a notch down in the next couple of months. It's difficult to imagine that cars made in Europe would be a security threat to the United States. At least I find it difficult to imagine, especially because they're safer than any other cars in the world.
I'm afraid we have to go back to Brexit for 1 second. Is the UK going to leave the EU in March? Your quick response.
Your guess is as good as mine. But I have to say, in the last couple of weeks, my fear has increased that even if they don't want to, they might crash out at the end of March. Because, you know, there might be, Yvette's Cooper amendment might be adopted by the House of Commons next week, which says the House of Commons will not accept a hard Brexit. But that doesn't have a meaning if you don't have an alternative. If you don't have an alternative that can get a positive vote, then hard Brexit will happen anyway. Whether, you know, it's like King Canute at the sea saying, "I don't want the sea to rise." It's going to happen if you don't have an alternative. So that's my worry. I don't really see. I think this is a very, very, very risky game to play it so late, to come so late. And God forbid that at the end of March we have them crashing out, but I think the risk of that happening has increased.
Should we make a test? Should we ask the audience what they think? So, hand of sign, is the UK going to leave? Yes, the UK is going to leave in March. And now, no, it's not going to leave in March. Well, that's difficult, huh? I think a little bit more from no. What do you think? Yeah.
Well, we should do the House of Commons, and the no's should go out that way, and the
So anyhow, let's say they're still a member of the EU in May. What happens with the election? Are they're legally obliged to hold elections, right?
Yep, that's the treaty, and our legal service looked at this very thoroughly. The Council legal service looked at this very thoroughly. There is no way around that. If there is an election, you need to take part in the election. Because if you don't, if you sort of find a political way around that, because this is also one of the things I don't understand in this debate. Very often in Britain, well, if there's a political will, we will find a way around it. We have treaties, we have rules. You can't just find a way around it. Just imagine you disregard the treaty on the composition of the European Parliament. Every single decision of the European Parliament would then be challenged in court. And the court will rule against that decision because the European Parliament would not be lawfully constituted. You can't fool around with treaties. You can't do that. And I think this is something people should understand. If there is an extension, and that extension goes beyond the date of the European election, then I'm afraid the United Kingdom will have to take part in the European election. I don't see any other way around that.
That would be quite awkward. Any more questions from the floor? A gentleman first in the fourth or fifth row here. Wait, you get a microphone. Please briefly introduce yourself.
Daniel Dayan, I'm a Romanian academic. Let me ask you, you put a lot of emphasis on the integrity of the single market. This is the rule of the game in the Union and so on. You mentioned a minimum wage, I think, which is in empathy, let's say, with a benign interpretation of the single market. You mentioned also the rule of law. But let me ask you, the single market has good sides, but also not so friendly sides for people. This is why people put a lot of emphasis on fairness. If I ask you, because you also mentioned a lot values, how shall we base the single market more on values so that people should feel that the single market does function with fairness, with fair play? Otherwise, and what are the major weaknesses of public policies, either at EU level or national levels, which made people so angry? If we do not put the finger also at failed public policies, we'll continue to repeat the same mistakes in years to come. And we won't be able to arrest the rise of populism and extremism.
I mean, I don't want to go back to Adam Smith, but let me say that. I mean, Adam Smith understood that capitalism can only work for a society if it is soundly based on moral values. And, you know, otherwise we're in the hands of Gordon Gekko, and who wants to be in the hands of Gordon Gekko? So I believe moral values underpin our economic system. And the translation of moral values you see in social contracts in society. And concretely, I talked about minimum wage. I was in a member state over the weekend where trade unions were forced to accept a clause when they closed a deal on wage increase, a clause that said they would commit themselves not to hold strikes for 3 years. Now, I think the right to hold strikes should not be excluded through a labor contract on wages. So we have a morality problem in our system. And this morality problem affects all of us. Even if it affects only one member state, it affects all of us. And the European economy cannot survive if we base it on wage competition. Wage competition we cannot win from the rest of the world. The quality of our productivity should not be by lowering wages, but increasing the quality of our productivity through education, through inventions, through R&D. And that applies to, I think, the European Union as a whole. The issue, for instance, of collective bargaining, we should put that front and center again. We should convince the youngest generations that trade unions are something that work for the common good, and they should become members of trade unions and make sure trade unions have this position to negotiate labor agreements. I think it is unacceptable that we have now price levels in member states very close and still salaries hugely different. I find it unacceptable if we have different qualities of product in the same market catering to different historic experiences or levels of consumption. You know, all these things are moral issues. So if we don't understand that the functioning of the internal market is deeply linked to our morality, then we will go wrong. Then things will become very brutal indeed. But I am hopeful that we are moving in that direction. There's strong support. You know, when Stefan Löfven introduced with Jean-Claude Juncker the idea of a social pillar, it was seen as just talk. But within quite a short period of time, we now have a European Labour Authority, something that nobody thought would be possible. So I think there is now a certain momentum that will help us create more justice in the market. And I agree with you, one of the huge consequences of the crisis is that inequalities in almost all member states have hugely increased. And this has brought a strong feeling of unfairness to the middle classes and to large parts of the population. If we don't fix that, the rage of the people against the machine and others will only increase. And then the yellow vest issue in France will only be the beginning of a much wider issue all across the EU. But we can fix this. We can fix this to bring more fairness to the way our economy works.
You are a member of a college that was labeled as political. Now, political means different things for different people. What does it mean for you, and would your commission also be political?
Well, my counter question would be, has there ever been a college that was not political?
Anybody an answer to that?
It would be nice to...
Yes, the gentleman in the row here.
Has the Delors...
There's a microphone coming up.
The Delors Commission, was that not a political commission? We're political because that's what's in the treaty.
The gentleman in the second row.
Yes. My name is Diego López Garrido. I'm the Executive Vice President of the Alternativas Foundation from Spain. Mr. Timmermans.
Excuse me, do you have an answer to the question on the political commission? Otherwise, I would like to take your question in 2 minutes.
2 minutes?
Yes, let's first talk about the political commission.
Okay.
Anybody would like to respond to that? Was there ever a commission that was not political? Are there any opinions in the room? Please. The gentleman.
My name is Laurens Jan Brinkhorst. I was a former minister. Mr. Timmermans, have you ever discussed with Mark Rutte the nature of the European Commission? I fundamentally agree with you, but Mr. Rutte doesn't stop repeating that the Commission should be less political.
Well, you know, one of the effects of the crises we've been facing, we shouldn't forget that to a large extent, politically, in the last 5 years, we've been handling one crisis after the other. And that has given a far more operational role to the European Council than was intended in the treaties. So some in the European Council like that a lot and would like to reduce the Commission to the Secretariat of the European Council. But where they get it wrong is if you do that, you create a huge disbalance between the biggest member states and all the rest. Because the treaty as it was written, with a balance between the three main institutions, was written to take care of both the interests of both the biggest and the smallest member states. It is a balancing act. And that's why I say three institutions are political. We don't claim to be the only political institution. Three institutions are political. What I don't like is when it is said the Commission is political, which means the Commission doesn't apply the rules. Then we go wrong. I think within this triumvirate of three political institutions, the Commission should be professional. Professional. That is our trademark. The quality of our work is our trademark. And we make that quality on the basis of political choices. But the quality should never be disputed. If that is disputed, then the Commission will lose its position. And, you know, look at the Stability and Growth Pact. I think you can say now that this Commission, the Juncker Commission, was absolutely right to use the elements of flexibility that the Stability and Growth Pact offered. Absolutely right, because you see the way this has affected economic growth in countries like Spain, Portugal, and Ireland. Had we not done that, economic growth in those countries would have been far more painful. So that is being a political commission. That's not brushing aside the rules, that's applying the rules in their full complexity. That's what we've did, and I'm very proud of that, because it has changed the whole nature of austerity in a much more pro-growth situation. And I think Europe is in a much more Keynesian situation today than it was 4 or 5 years ago, and I think that's a good thing.
I very much
Thank you
agree.
very much.
Can you please tell Mr. Rutte?
I keep telling Mr. Rutte, yes.
Please,
yes.
yes. I hope you will listen.
I am terribly sorry, but we have we have exhausted our time, so could you please keep it very brief? Yeah.
Very brief. Mr. Timmermans, we have a monetary union, but not a complete economic union because of the lack of tax harmonization. The immediate effect is fiscal dumping. Yes. My question is it possible to have in Europe a tax harmonization? Is it possible to have a list of tax havens? Is it possible? It's a crucial issue for the future in Europe.
I couldn't agree more with you. I couldn't agree more with you. I think, you know, tax competition might have been a good idea when countries were still much stronger than companies. But now we have to face the reality that we are dealing with businesses that have more money and more clout than a whole range of our member states. So they can go from member state to member state and say, we'll come to you, but then we don't pay taxes. And if a member state then says, no, that's not acceptable, oh, we'll go next door. And so this playing off one member state against the other is undermining the very basis of a tax-based social model. And how can you explain to somebody who here in Brussels opens a cafe that she or he should pay full taxes and that Starbucks next door pays no taxes at all in Europe? That's unacceptable. And the only solution for that is to have European rules on tax harmonization. European rules on tax harmonization. And, you know, European leaders should wake up and smell the coffee, because if you don't do that, how can you ask of ordinary citizens to give a contribution to higher fuel prices and give a contribution for transforming our economy in a sustainable economy if you let the biggest earners in our economy off tax-free? Companies should pay taxes where they make profits. This should be the rule, and this should be the rule implemented by European rules supported by all governments in the European Union.
Thank you very much. Would you like to add anything? In that sense, thank you very much, Franz Timmermans, for being here with us today. Thank you to the audience for this interactive debate. And please join me again in an applause for Franz Timmermans.
Ladies and gentlemen, your attention please. I'd like to do a few housekeeping announcements. So the labs will start at 2:30 sharp. 2:30 sharp.